Coach Tony, Wrestling Podium Performance, and today is the start of the 4-part mini-series on shin splints here on YouTube, or as they're commonly called, medial tibial stress syndrome. So what are shin splints? And that's exactly what we're going to be diving into in this 4-part series. So the 4 parts are going to be, first, the anatomy, so all the structures involved, the muscles, tendons, ligaments, the actual joints. As well, the second part, we dive into the causes. What is the underlying reason, or what is actually causing the pain of shin splints to manifest where they are? The third part is going to be commonly misdiagnosed medical issues that are called shin splints, but they actually aren't. And in a few of these cases, it can be quite catastrophic, leading all the way up to and including amputation, which, as you can guess, would be a worst case scenario for anybody. And finally, the 4th part of the series is going to be a bit more of like a 2-parter of its own, because we have to first look at prevention of shin splints, as well as ways to mitigate the issues involved around shin splints. So as we dive in, the first part, all about the anatomy of shin splints. All right, so now that the intro's out of the way, let's dive right into part 1, the anatomy. First thing we have to look at is, where does the name shin splints come from? It comes from the shin bone, that bone in the front of your leg below the knee that in soccer they wear shin guards to protect. But now, why is it that shin splints manifest in this bone? It's not actually that the bone itself is injured. We have to take a look at all the structures around. So let's dive into our anatomy, starting off with the bones. First, we have to start around the knee. At the knee, we have our patella. We're going to be focusing on everything from here down in this video. So the patella is our kneecap. From here, directly below that, we have our tibia, the shin bone. But right behind that is a smaller bone called the fibula. Now, a way to liken this is take a look at your forearm. There's actually 2 bones in your forearm. Well, in our lower leg, it's very similar to that. There's 2 bones there. The difference is they don't move quite as much. And because of this lack of movement, it's quite stable down there. Now, these 2 bones actually attach at our ankle with an articulation to what's called the calcaneus, which is that big bone at the back of our foot that is our heel. From here in front, you have your tarsals, and then in front of that is your metatarsals, the moving parts of your toes. So now that we know what bones are going to be involved, we have to know and take a look at all of our muscles. We're not going to go deep diving into this like an anatomy text. We're going to cover the main players. So directly outside of your, to the outside of your tibia, the shin bone, is the tibialis anterior. Literally what its name means is in front, anterior, and tibialis, right by the tibia. This muscle's entire job is lifting your foot and your toes up and letting them go back down. At the back of our lower leg, we have the calf, made up of 2 primary muscles. The soleus, which is actually sits for the most part underneath the big muscle that we see, which is our gastrocnemius. That's the one that, when it's very well developed, you can see a bit of a split in it. The soleus, you don't really get to see quite as much. These 2, when they're extremely powerful, as we know, they can handle a lot of work, but if they're over powerful compared to the anterior tibialis, this can cause a weak link and a structural imbalance. A structural imbalance can then lead to an injury, which shin splints would be the injury that can be manifesting. From here, we look a little bit deeper inside of the actual lower leg. We have several other muscles in here. Their names are quite simple to remember, because for the most part, it's just either tibialis or fibularis, anterior and posterior. So all that means is in front or behind that bone. So these muscles can be, if it's anterior, its primary job is going to be assisting your anterior tibialis in lifting the foot up. And if it's behind, its job is going to be either stability, keeping the bones in place, or assisting the calf in lifting your heel up. Now, going down below, we have our plantar fascia. That's at the bottom of our foot. If you take a look at the bottom of your foot right now, you have an arch in your foot. The arch in your foot, the membrane that covers it, is the plantar fascia. If you actually curl up your toes too hard, you can feel this spasm and cramp up. That is your plantar fascia spasm. So from here, there's also smaller muscles involved in your actual movement of the toes, but we're not going to really get into that because they're not as crucial for the purposes of shin splints. They have a very small role, but it's pretty much negligible because those muscles, for the most part, only attach around your ankle, whereas your actual tibialis anterior attaches at the top of your foot and has a bit of a role in pulling your toes up as well in a synergistic relationship with the digitorums down there. Now that we've gone through simple anatomy of the muscles, now we have to think about, okay, what are muscles attaching to the bone with? Tendons. The big tendons we got to keep in mind here is, one, at the top of the tibia is our patellar tendon. So this is actually an offshoot of your quadriceps tendon. So your quadriceps actually comes down to your knee, it attaches, but that tendon actually becomes your quadriceps tendon, and it actually goes over the front of your patella, and at the bottom of it, it becomes the patellar tendon and attaches to your tibia. And its job is to help pull up your lower leg, to straighten out your leg. At the bottom of your foot, you have your anterior tibialis tendon. As its name implies, anterior tibialis, it attaches to your foot. Like I said before, it pulls the foot up. The back of your leg, we have our Achilles tendon. That's that big, massive tendon on the back of your leg from your calf to your heel. Its job is to keep everything attached so that you can actually lift up your heels. But just like with your quadriceps tendon to the patella, this actually comes around and actually wraps up underneath and becomes part of your plantar fascia. Now, this can lead and actually cause a little bit of the issues with the shin splints, which I'm going to cover in part 2. From here, we now have to take a look at the last big piece of the puzzle in terms of anatomy, some of the ligaments. First, let's take a look at the knee. There's 4 primary ligaments in the knee. We have your ACL and PCL, so anterior and posterior cruciate ligament, and then we have your LCL and MCL, being the medial and lateral collateral ligaments. So a lot of people in sport hear about one or several of these either being sprained or torn, and that reduces the stability in the knee joint. Between the fibula and your tibia, there are a couple of ligaments in there that actually keep things connected. We're not really going to dive into those too much because they don't have much role to play in here. All you need to really know is that the ligament here keeps those 2 bones somewhat stable together with one another so that there's not too much of a rotation force in the bottom of your leg. It's not like with your wrist where you can turn your wrist over. With your ankle, you can't really turn your foot all the way up like you can with your forearm and your wrist. The reason for this, the lower leg, your leg in general, needs a lot more stability than your upper body. All right, so that basically covers all of the anatomy that we really need to keep in mind for shin splints. We don't need to dive too deep into it for the purposes of this video. We just need the overview of what anatomy is involved. So in part 2, I'm going to be diving into the causes of shin splints. There's going to be several causes, some fairly obvious and some that are going to probably catch you off guard. Anyways, I look forward to seeing you in part 2. Coach Tony, wrestling podium performance, embrace your potential.